Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? I just wanted to do a quick AMA before my flight here in a little bit. Right now, I'm in Milwaukee. No, I am not here for the DNC convention as much as I would love to be there pissing people off. I was actually here for an event called Better Discourse. And so my flight isn't for another 3 hours, and my checkout isn't for another hour or so. So I figured, a lot of people probably wanted to know what the hell was going on, why I was at this event, and asked me questions about the crazy stuff, fun stuff, great conversations. Uh, and I mean, there were some interesting people there, that's for sure. Uh, Milo was there. Milo Yiannopoulos, he was there. Destiny was also there. Uh, Melissa Chin was also there, uh, who is like a populist conservative, more libertarian, I guess would be the word. Um, and there were a few liberals there too. Maybe like two progressives, and that was interesting. That was interesting because, well, apparently, I thought it was just because of COVID that they had trouble getting progressives, but man, basically, they told me that they have trouble getting leftist progressives because they don't want to sit in the same room as conservatives. They don't want to engage with them, which I feel is extremely problematic because, well, I mean, I know how I feel. If you can't, if you're passionate about what you do, like, why wouldn't you not be able to articulate that and argue that the worst thing that could happen is to you, you may look like you might look like you don't know what you're talking about for the moment, but you learn something new, you sharpen your rhetorical blade, and then you move on. So I just found it a little problematic that I mean, it was a leftist who was telling me this. Two leftists told me this that organized the event or helped organize the event. They were like, "Yeah, we always have trouble getting specifically progressive leftists." I mean, Destiny was on stage and he was like, "Yeah, I'm a neoliberal." Like he admits he's a neoliberal. So it's that part was a little bit interesting, and I understand, the hesitancy sometimes to engage with certain people that you worry may be disingenuous. But that's kind of like what comes with the territory. So you got to be able to argue, and I think that's a problem with the progressive movement. There's too much avoidance of the other side. It's no one wants to engage. No one they don't like confrontation. They might like it on Twitter. They may like it when they can do a one-sided video, but they don't like to actually engage the other side. And I have to say, after engaging all of the other sides yesterday, I engaged conservatives, moderate conservatives, uh, moderates, actual lifelong Democrats that would consider themselves liberals, literal neoliberals, and and a couple progressives. And it was one of the best political experiences of my life, and just the conversations that we had over the last couple of days were just some of the best and most productive conversations that we had. For me, it was so I had my panel was how to address racial inequity in this country, like how to reconcile or how to fix it, I guess. Now, obviously, you can't fix it completely or 100%, but that wasn't like that. They weren't like setting that burden, of course. But it was an interesting panel. So obviously, I'm a progressive. I joked with them at the beginning. I said, I'm not exactly sure why they put me on a panel about racial inequity, but I'm going to try my best. So his name was Jangle. He was a progressive too. Great guy. To the right of me, literally and figuratively and regionally, was Carlin. And then to the right of her was Melissa Chin. And so what was interesting about this conversation is that I was expecting it to actually be my least favorite panel. I know it's kind of counterintuitive because I was participating in the panel, but I just know how conversations about race can get, whether you're dealing with progressives, liberals, conservatives, or anything in between. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. So when uh, when I tell you that it actually turned out to be my favorite panel, believe when I tell you I was surprised. And I was worried that there was going to be a lot of gaslighting, and I was worried that there was going to be a lot of like disingenuous responses, and there weren't. I mean, yeah, there were points where we disagreed or offered, not necessarily even contradicting points. It's, maybe there was an urge to put more emphasis on one point over the other, but on a panel with liberals, progressives, and conservatives, we were actually able to sit there and have a great conversation in front of a crowd that at that moment, admittedly, was mostly conservative, and it was fun and it was genuine and it was real. And I can tell you one positive point that each of them, like each person on the panel, brought up that was like a genuine attempt to reconcile racial inequity, and that's really hard to see. Dap, this actually happened this yesterday. This panel happened yesterday. I know for those of you who watch like Destiny and stuff like that, y'all probably saw the fact that he was live debating Milo Yiannopoulos, and that's where I was at. Actually, I asked a question to Milo, and somebody recognized me, which is funny because they recognized me off of Destiny's Twitch stream, and they tweeted me on Twitter like, "Yo, are you at the debate?" I'm like, "Yeah." So it was that event. It's called Better Discourse in Milwaukee, and it was actually supposed to be like 400 or 500 people, but obviously because of COVID, couldn't have that. So, but nonetheless, it was still it was just and they said it might have actually been better because people were trying to actually have genuine one-on-one conversations and connect with each other rather than trying to get one-offs and witty retorts and just what generally we see in that type of space. So uh, the video for my panel, they're going to be sending to me sometime in the next couple of days. They had like a super really well edited video. They actually do it for all of us, which is really cool. They actually pay somebody to come in and record, edit, and distribute all of our content, like specifically edited for us, which is pretty fucking dope. So usually you don't necessarily get that. You get like a Politicon, but not at every event. It was really well done from what I was looking at. Uh, so the like just as like a overview of what I said, the arguments that I presented, because eventually at some point it got to reparations, so that was fun. So they asked, you know, the definition of, are we okay with the definition of equity and inequity? Why do we prefer it? They also talked about, I think I was the one who brought up reparations, but not actually, I wasn't making an argument for reparations at that point, but I brought it up as because I felt like the way that we address racial inequity in this country is actually by through reconciliation, and the only way we can have true reconciliation is by understanding our history. And it's because basically it seems like we're all operating from different experiential and historical and educational starting points where people think like they're basing their entire opinion off of like this stepping stone, whereas somebody else is basing their opinion off of this stepping stone, and like everybody has different levels of knowledge, and that's honestly just a failure of our education system. And also in truth it's an unwillingness for some to go look for knowledge that makes them uncomfortable, and that's what I discussed. So I actually opened up. Y'all know how I feel about FDR. Was he a good president? For the most part, I guess. But y'all know how I feel. I've always said it's the problem, once again, the problem with the progressive movement, and it can really be codified as everything. This whole FDR, I mean, the Bernie 2016, 2020, like how it was handled regarding Tulsi, uh, how they deal with the Democratic Party and just keep taking it with no lube. Like everybody in the Democrat or everybody in the progressive movement, for the most part, is constantly chasing the next FDR. But I'm always trying to understand how none of them understand why Henry Wallace was never president, and how rarely, very rarely, do they ever bring him up as a champion that he was for progressives, for racial equality, for climate change, even at that time, for he this is like, if you can understand that it's because you've done your research. If you understand what I'm saying, it's because you've done your research. And so I opened up with, so because listen, you have to understand, I was in a crowd full of conservatives. So of course, like the first thing I thought of, I got to immediately disarm them because I know that they're going to think I'm a Democrat. I know that's exactly what they're going to think. Surprise, surprise, everybody thinks black people are Democrats. I don't know why. But but I immediately had to disarm them. And so I was like, so let's start off with a little history lesson. Y'all know FDR, the Democrat, progressive. Uh, he introduced a New Deal, and the New Deal, of course, brought into play the Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration was the exact organization that wrote in their laws, in their regulations, that you absolutely cannot and will not have a black person living in the suburbs. You will not be able to get a contracting loan for your suburb to be built, or get a house, whatever, for your suburb to be built if you do not allow black people to live, or if you do allow black people to live in that suburb, or that homestead. So the facts show the number one way to accrue wealth in this country specifically is through home ownership, because people take out second mortgages. You pass that down to your kids so they don't have a mortgage eventually. This is I mean, home ownership is tantamount to a secure financial life, a secure family, secure marriages. It's your kids' future. And then, because I also know that one of the number one arguments conservatives make about racial inequity is the breakdown of the black family, which is a whole different discussion. And guess what the number one cause of divorce is? Finances. And so you look at history where we see a Democrat introduce a policy that everybody celebrates uncritically. So everybody on the left uncritically celebrates, as it was the key instrument in ensuring that the number one way to accrue wealth black people never had access to. And so obviously, I know you might be asking, especially because like the conversation of reparations came up, and so why would you start there specifically? Because when you engage somebody on like the conversation of reparations or racial equity or anything like that, they immediately go to my family weren't slave owners, right? That's the first thing that they do. And so now we have to kind of like establish a base that we can operate from, where the other side will actually listen. And so I just removed that out of the conversation. I mentioned it, but I was like, but that's not what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on recent history, because I genuinely believe that some people just want to hear a better argument. I'm not even joking. Like, that people just are tired of hearing the slave argument. It's sad and it's unfortunate because slavery actually happened, but people don't like feeling guilty. They don't like feeling implicated, especially with something they can't actually like tangibly like see or feel, because it didn't happen to them. Like, so the reason I went with that was because I asked them. So we all acknowledge Jim Crow is bad, and everybody nods. I said, please, everybody, please nod your heads. Yes, Jim Crow is bad. Thank you. I said, so everybody, by the way, like this video, share this video, but because people need to hear this. I'm gonna post the panel later, but people need to hear this too, because like I said, progressives just need to understand how to engage these people if you want to win people over. And so I said, everybody agrees Jim Crow's bad. Everybody agrees that's a Jim Crow policy. And everybody agrees, right, that if we found out a policy like that was still existing today, well, then we would have to do something to reconcile that, right? And everybody in the crowd was like, yeah, we agree 100%. Mostly conservatives, right? We agree, yeah. That's horrid. And them damn Democrats, they were excited to get the dump on the Democrats and say, yo, that's crazy, because redlining, a policy that came from that, the last case of it was found in 2015. That's the most recent case of redlining, a Jim Crow policy that was solidified in the federal government by FDR. in 2015 when the law was supposed to be repealed 1968, 1969-ish. And what? No, 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 no. They were like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, yeah, 2015. And I said, and once again, we all agree Jim Crow is really bad, right? Well, you know another Jim Crow policy, because I know we talk about breakdown of family, and I know my colleagues on stage were going to argue in favor of education. Oh, education is actually the key. It's education and better access to institutions. Okay, I would agree. And once again, we all agree Jim Crow is very, very bad, right? And I'm not implicating you all as slave owners. I'm not saying that. But since we all agree Jim Crow is very bad, and we all agree education is tantamount to success in any, no matter who you are, then you would also find it a little problematic that literally the Jim Crow policy of 93% of education being funded by property taxes, it's a little problematic, don't you think? After we just had a conversation that the number one way to accrue wealth in this country is through home ownership. Federal government made it law that we cannot have access to that home ownership. Then they made it so that the only way your schools are funded, basically only 10% of funding comes through federal government. So, but they made it so that 93% of all funding for your education comes from that home ownership. But we don't own the fucking homes. We don't own any homes. So if it's public housing and projects, how are the schools being funded? And how can we at that point, because everybody agrees all these things are necessary for us to have equitable opportunity for prosperity, how can we at all pretend that things are somehow better? Do you know that like the job, like it's, I wish I could remember the statistic, but basically, like if you look at a breakdown of a lot of statistics for things that we were fighting for in 1968, 1969 for black people, the statistics have almost never changed. Since 1960, they still haven't changed for black people. Kathy Lloyd, thank you very much for the super chat. I hate this country. Have a drink on me. Stay safe out there. I worry when you travel. Hell, I worry when I travel too, right? Thank you so much, Kathy. I will definitely enjoy a drink on you. I appreciate that. But you know what? I can't say I hate this country, and because I truly do believe in our potential. And here's why I say that. Yesterday, after I had this conversation, obviously it was a little bit more than that, but after I had this conversation and people, at some point I think we like gun rights get brought up, and they were like, oh well, like, oh, so what do you feel on gun? Because like people, what do? They check to feel if you are consistent in your principles, and so they, especially given everything that's going on with police brutality and BLM, and they were like, so, oh, well, how do you feel about gun? I'm like, oh, that's funny. I'm a Second Amendment absolutist, and I actually think conservatives don't go far enough. They have no idea what they're actually fighting for with the Second Amendment. They're like, what? I'm like, I absolutely believe in the right to bear arms. I absolutely believe in the right to bear arms against your government and foreign governments as well. And guess what? I absolutely believe in the right to form a well-regulated militia to train people in your community about gun safety, about learning how to use that weapon, about what using these weapons are for. Absolutely. I said, if anything, I'm more pro Second Amendment than most conservatives. Or at least most conservatives think they are. Now, when they hear this, all of a sudden they're like, hold up, what? And of course, at some point I get asked about Black Lives Matter. Well, how do you feel about BLM? Because they're, once again, they aren't asking me necessarily because they care about how I feel about BLM or that they care about how I feel about the Second Amendment. What they want to know is, do I buy into his argument about racial equity? Because I'm not going to buy into it if he's only saying it because he's black. I'm not only going to buy into it because he's saying it because he's progressive. I'm not going to only buy into it because he's saying it because he's a leftist or maybe a Democrat, right? What I want to know if he is principled. And that is how, if I will decide whether or not I accept the argument. And this is why I'm anal. And everybody obviously who's a fan of the show knows I'm very anal about being consistently principled, because the left kills itself when people like Sean King will pretend to be fighting for social justice and then vehemently back Kamala Harris. Right? We kill ourselves. We lose our mandate. They stop taking us seriously, and we don't have that much room to operate. So this is why I say I love this country, because I've seen the ugliest sides of it. But so we talk about BLM, and I say BLM, the message, I absolutely believe in. In fact, I said it's not a message, it's a way of life, and we have to constantly keep reminding people. And I said you would agree that BLM, Black Lives Matter, the message, that we have to constantly keep reminding people, because then I just remember what I told you on stage. They were like, yeah, you know what, you make a good point. I said, now, however, with that being said, Black Lives Matter is a nonprofit corporation that co-opt our movement, a black movement, like all these other nonprofit corporations that are basically, if we look at like who they're really ran by, who are really giving the guidance, which is white liberal moderates. Do I like them? Hell no. They heard our movement, they heard everything we fight for, they co-opted and then throw us under the bus. I'm as mad at them as some of you may be. Now, do I conflate that with local BLM organizations, local protesters, local leaders? No, I don't. What they're doing, the work they're doing on the ground, is extremely important and should absolutely not be conflated with what these vultures are doing to our movement. I said, do you believe that George Bush is representative of you? They're like, no. Do you believe that Charlie Kirk is representative of you as a conservative? No. So why should you conflate everything the national level BLM does, because they're trying to make a profit like all these other vultures on the left and the right, with what these local people are doing as they're getting their asses beat in the middle of the street as they're literally having their hands up? And they were like, oh, wow. Man, wow, that was, you make a good point. About maybe 5 minutes later, the conservative walks up to me with his friend. And he says, hey, man, I just gotta let you know something. I know you weren't arguing for reparations or anything like that, but you changed my mind on reparations. And then the other conservatives, yeah, me too. He said, I'm not sure if I agree with cash payments. I'm not sure how we're going to implement it, but you changed my mind, man. He said, this country's fucked up. Why? Yeah, the arguments for reparations were good, right? The arguments for recognizing racial inequity were good, and even the arguments for recognizing reconciliation were good, right? But that, when the hell has the best argument mattered to the other side? Sometimes, most times actually, when they're set in their minds about what they know and what they've read, because we're all limited by experiences. The only deciding factor, and when you watch, once again, when you watch the video, you'll understand why I am so anal about this, and people can hate me all the fuck they want to. I don't care, because I've seen it in real life. The only deciding factor between those people listening to and internalizing those three arguments and completely ignoring them because they see me as some progressive, liberal, hypocritical, whatever, was the fact that I was consistently principled in my logic, in my reasoning. When I say I don't like the federal government, that was not just me trying to win you over. I'm explaining to you why I don't like them. When I say systemic oppression is a problem, I mean I understand and recognize it is such a problem that I have no choice but to believe firmly in the Second Amendment. When I say that government overreach is a problem, I walked up to Milo Yiannopoulos. I said, hey man, don't really like you. Not gonna lie. However, with that being said, when you got banned from Australia, I was one of the primary people speaking up for you, saying that was ridiculous because I know that you are full of shit. And if I feel like you're full of shit and I believe in the causes I fight in, then there's no goddamn reason why I shouldn't challenge you. to a discourse, to a productive debate, and prove why you are full of shit. Or otherwise, I don't believe in shit I'm saying. I'm simply trying to achieve the moral high ground and seem more virtuous and righteous than I actually am because it gets you a fucking paycheck in 2020. That is exactly why you have to be consistently principled. You can't waffle based off of who you're trying to attract. I mean, unless you're, because the only reason you're waffling based on who you're trying to attract is because you're trying to attract one side or the other. You're not trying to achieve unity. I missed the super chat. Wallace West, thank you very much for the super chat. Socialist MMA didn't perform well against Fausch. Someone needs to come in prepared in his place about the Biden-Trump debate. So I haven't actually watched that yet. I haven't gotten to watch any of the debates, honestly. I know Fausch debated Socialist MMA, and I know that Kim Iverson debated Destiny, and Milo actually debated somebody like a week ago, and it was funny because they both showed up to the event, so that was funny. But I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet. But I know, I probably know what you mean. I haven't saw it yet, but like Vouch has a way of gaslighting people, and neoliberals tend to do this in a way that if you're not an experienced debater, you will take the bait and just start amping. Oh, speaking of amping, y'all know Destiny, right? If you don't know Destiny, he's like a Twitch debater, self-proclaimed neoliberal, and definitely an agitator, unapologetically. So we actually got into a good conversation, by the way. It ended well. It was a conversation in the back because obviously he's a Biden supporter, and I was like, "Yeah, Biden." I was like, "Biden's a segregationist," and he was like, "What? What are you talking about?" I was like, "You didn't know?" Yeah, he's a little segregationist. Not hype. I'm not hyperbolizing anything. I said he literally said, "I don't want my kids to grow up in a racial jungle." And so because whoever debates him over this Biden shit, for some reason he's racist, but don't actually give them any like foundational, concrete reasons as to why people are making this claim. Because nobody really leaves the Twitter talking points, right? Everybody would agree with that. And so I'm like, yeah, he said that, and he was like, what? And so of course, true Destiny fashion. Well, the country's more moderate. You know how we do. He says, well, most people just need to admit that the country is more moderate than we were willing to admit. I'm like, actually, I would agree. The country is more moderate, but not in the sense that you think. He was like, well, then why did Bernie lose then? Why did Bernie? I'm like, because the Democrats cheated. And he was like, well, wow, you're telling me that they just cheated and nothing happened? It would be the biggest story of the century. I'm like, Destiny, I hate to tell you this. And I said, I don't mean this offensively, but you do this all the time. You truly believe in this fallacy that if Destiny never heard of it, then it never happened. And that's not reality. And he was like, well, if this was breaking news and groundbreaking news, then why wouldn't every story? And I was like, because there are journalists literally paid to not cover it. There's CIA agents in journalism now. Couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. He thought it was conspiracy. He said, well, so why wouldn't somebody latch onto this and just start talking about this and blow up and make, you mean Jimmy Dore, who literally books shows selling out around the country because he's willing to talk about this? Sagar and Crystal from the Hill Rising, who they're now the most popular goddamn show on the internet because one mainstream media company figured out, wow, people do want to hear about this. Yeah, Destiny, we talk about this. There are people who dedicate their time almost exclusively to talking about this. And he could not fathom this. We got on the concept of election integrity. We all know it exists. He didn't believe it. Now, when I tell you that, I mean, because I just want to make a long story short, 'cause I was breaking down everything. You know, I know me. That's what I do. When it comes to election integrity, it's what we don't argue with me about motherfucking election integrity, bro. Don't do it. Don't do that. That's the one thing. Damn racial equity. Don't argue with me about election integrity. So, in all seriousness, if you know destiny, if you know destiny, you know it's hard to keep destiny quiet, right? Yeah, y'all know that. If you can keep destiny quiet for more than 2 to 3 minutes, you've done something that is very, very rare indeed. So, as he's denying election integrity, as he is denying all the systemic issues that we are dealing with when it comes to election fraud, and I just remind him briefly. I said, because I asked a question, actually using his framework. I asked the question of Milo because they were debating, and I used Destiny's framework because he actually made a brilliant argument about and for the framing of racism and systemic racism, and why it's necessary to call systemic racism what it is. And I used his, because he made a brilliant argument. I mean, he really had Milo like, oh shit, like, okay, well, I just don't accept that framework. That's all he could say. So I said, now, Destiny, you made such a superb argument on stage about the realities of elites and how they will use systemic oppression and they will use racism to oppress and suppress the vulnerable so they can rise to the top. We understand that this is inherent in this corrupt system, and this corrupt system enables the behavior simultaneously. It's a cyclical thing, right? Now, you can consciously admit all of that, but then when it's time to admit that, well, if Biden rose to the top and Biden was responsible for the 94 crime bill, and Biden said he doesn't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle, and he's been a lifelong senator, which Destiny admitted in more than one way, basically, that they're corrupt, the senators, and he admits this, the system that they participate in and that they engage in and enable is corrupt. So I said, so you believe all of that about the corrupt system, but you can't believe that that corrupt system would help to, how do you think they keep the power for so long? You think that that's your candidate is innocent from that? Based off of what? Your candidate rose to the top when no statistical measure in Democratic primary history says that he should have won. He is unelectable, and everyone knows it. Everybody knows it. Maybe you should consider the fact that he is selected because he is corrupt, and he helps to perpetuate that corruption so it can continue. And so the odds would be stacked in his favor, and they would be stacked by the corrupt in favor of the corrupt. Considering that you are the one who made the argument that systemic corruption is inherent in systemic racism. And I think that we could both agree that the buck wouldn't stop at simply racism. Destiny was quiet for 5 minutes. He listened to everything I had to say. Could not believe it. And he was like, man, you know what? That was a good conversation, man. It's like, whoa. Wow. All right. So that was fun. Nizar G, what's going on, man? I say don't tell me to vote for the lesser of two evils because I don't want to vote for Trump. Trump's greatest evil is his authoritarianism. Callers will be more efficient despite than Trump. Thoughts? I mean, Trump's worst evil is authoritarianism, and Kamala's worst evil will be authoritarianism and blackface. I don't know. Like, this is basically what it is. Biden is terrifying, and when you really break it down, whether I don't give a damn who it is, Fausch, Destiny, anybody who tries to make an argument for Biden, your whole thing is race, winning, race and winning, and winning and race and winning. Never foreign policy, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that. It's never a foreign policy argument. They couldn't even try to even kind of get into that goddamn territory. But it's always those two things. I'm like, so you want me, for the sake of racial equity and uh, uh, and winning, strategic value, you want me to vote for the most unelectable candidate who literally said he doesn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle, and who is literally a segregationist. Bruh. Bruh. That ain't it, bro. That ain't it. So, it was just, I was able to have, in some form or fashion, the conversation, the baseline conversation with several people that I've been wanting to talk to, that I had never been able to have before for various reasons, mostly because who wants to talk to a black progressive who's actually principled? Nobody really likes that. If I'm being frank, like it's a terrifying thing. It is a terrifying thing for somebody who thinks they have all the answers, who think they have all the experiences, who think that they are principled, and then they meet somebody who is principled, who I admit I don't have any of the answers. I do have a lot of questions though, okay? And quite frankly, I'm one of the few, I'm one of the very few black debaters in the history of this country. That is not hyperbole. I mean, there may be very talented, skillful debaters who made it like a career in high school and college. There may be 200 of us in the history of this country, and that is not hyperbole. Like that might even be like being generous. Just historically speaking, black people have always been excluded from debate spaces, whether it be because of segregation or because of the way we're treated. So we've always been excluded from debate spaces. So it's already rare for anyone to have engaged with a black person who is involved in debate, let alone that person be a leftist, because usually what ends up happening is they become conservative or libertarian, just by way, that's because that's what happens with debaters. And then that person actually know his history or her history. It's principled on the most controversial issues of today, and can articulate them in a way that isn't conspiracy theory, that isn't conjecture. It is fact and logic, and then we'll use your own fucked up logic against you. Like, to be quite frank, in my debate coach, she's like, we've never really seen anything like you before, Niko, and it probably terrifies the fuck out of people who thought they thought that they were the top of the top and the cream of the crop. And I take a lot of pride in that responsibility. I take a lot of pride in that ability, because it isn't something I like woke up with. I want to see change, so I worked really fucking hard at what I do. I did, like, that's, and everybody worked as hard to want to hone their rhetorical skills, their activism skills, their organizational skills, everything that it takes to begin to see that. I mean, look at Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a firebrand. He was just, oh, so you don't want to talk about racism? Okay, so let's talk about imperialism. Oh, you don't want to talk about imperialism? Well, let's talk about the fact that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. You want to talk about some stuff, then let's talk about it. If Martin Luther King would hit you, what do you want to discuss? You want to talk about over policing, you want to talk about over surveilling. That was what made that stuff never really gets talked about though. You get what I'm saying? Whenever they try to pigeonhole Martin Luther King to say, oh, it was brilliant on race. No, no, no. You know why everybody, including the white moderates that eventually became civil rights activists and worked with him, you know why they listened to him? Because it wasn't just race that he was able to discuss. That was not the only context MLK spoke in. And that was what made him so damn dangerous. And any white moderate, I don't give a fuck what they call themselves, progressive, liberal, conservative, in some way, form, or fashion, they're effectively, unless they're on the extreme right, effectively they're basically white moderates. Every one of them knows that Martin Luther King was a problem for anyone who was not principled. He was a problem for anyone who was a principal because he was exposing you. And if we have people who are consistent in that, like in their dedication to not just be educated. I remember I said on the panel, I said, see, it's funny because I feel like so many people, I said, I actually not sure how much I like the term African American, because that's what people say. Well, what do you think about racial inequity in African American? I said, no. See, that's people trying to limit the debate to what happens in this country, assuming that black people are merely experiencing inequity in this country, which obviously presupposes that, or at least it removes the conversation of imperialism and white supremacy's role in imperialism. And then, of course, somebody eventually brings up the fact that, what about the white working class? Guess what? I'm with you, bro. I'm with you. I don't fight him on it. For what? We're allies. I said, if anything, that should make you relate to me more. What are you talking about? I said, because guess what? If you're in West Virginia, you're the poorest person there. You are being discriminated against by police officers very specifically because you are poor, white, and working class. You are the most vulnerable member of your community, and that is why you suffer. How can you not be my brother? Because that's exactly what I'm trying to tell you we go through. How can you not be my sister? That is exactly, I'm telling you, we are the same. Our struggles are the same. Our class struggles are the same. It may be broken down a different way and experienced a different way in different areas, but our struggles are the same. So you cannot tell me I was poor and I was treated this way in my poor white community and I'm not black. Why were you treated that way? Because you fell into a demographic that you may or may not have had any control over. And that is wrong. Every time it happens. Every time it happens, it's wrong. Not just when it happens to black people, not just when it happens to women, not just when it happens to white working class, not just when it happens to the middle class, not just when it happens in America, not just when it happens overseas. Every time a demographic is suppressed or oppressed merely because they fit in that demographic, which basically only leaves the 1% left because they're doing all of it, it is wrong. And if people were quicker to say, well, look at what my brother or sister experienced over here, than they were to try and discount that experience with, well, what about my experiences? What about my experience? Bro, your experiences were bad too. Now where do we go from here? Now that we've acknowledged that both of our experiences are fucked up and we need to do something about it, how about we acknowledge why they're fucked up? And stop trying to get into an oppression Olympics. Let's acknowledge that our experiences are both unique, but they're both the same. That's it. And we had a lot of those conversations yesterday. A lot. I'm going to be putting up and sharing some interviews that I had with other conservatives and like that they interviewed me. And I mean, they, one guy said, he said, look, man, we've been agreeing too much. I was coming into this interview expecting to argue with you and disagree on everything. I'm trying really hard. And you're not giving me any leeway here. Like, because this is this is what America actually is. We don't disagree on much. We might disagree on the route. We might disagree on the methodology, but we don't disagree largely on the conclusion. We don't disagree largely on the values and that we like. We basically all disagree, the 99%. But that's not what gets elevated. That's not what goes viral. Everybody is trying to, once again, put out a witty quip, get the best tweet, get the most viral Facebook post, get the most viral YouTube video. So you never see it. Because the left is scared to engage the right refuses to engage the left. Everybody paints each other in these broad brushes. We are brothers and sisters in the struggle. And I'll fight for my brother and sister in the struggle like I'll fight for my brother in real life. Why wouldn't I? You think I don't want to see you suffer any more than I want to see black people suffer? And once again, if we started voting and activating and fighting, like instead of fighting like our lives depend on it and finally start fighting like someone else's life depends on it, because it does, our country would be a much, much better place for it. So thank you all so much for tuning in to this AMA. I know I talked a lot. It's supposed to be y'all asking me questions, but sorry. I know people were asking me to talk about the event, so I decided to go ahead and deal with it. But yeah, so the videos will be up. Be a little patient. My internet is still kind of ganky at my house until they install it and repair it. It's a whole different conversation, but hope you enjoyed the conversation. About to go catch this plane. Thank you all. Have a brilliant day. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. Oh, y'all go support Jen Perlman. She's running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz tomorrow. So go show her some love. I'll be there with the Convo Couch fam back together again. We always love that. Other than that, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.